in a city that rewards the ruthless and forgets the meek. One waitress was about to make a choice that would cost her everything she had. Her manager's voice was a venomous whisper in her ear. "Get him out, or you're out." In front of her, a lost elderly man shivered, clutching a faded photograph, his eyes filled with a storm of confusion. She looked from the old man's desperate face to the eviction notice burning a hole in her pocket. Every instinct for survival screamed at her to obey, to turn him back into the unforgiving rain. But in that moment, a quiet defiance took root in her heart, a decision that would unravel a web of deceit and lead her to the doorstep of one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the country. The rain against the plate-glass window of the Morning Glory diner wasn't just falling, it was attacking. Each drop seemed to have a personal vendetta against the city, hammering against the glass with a relentless fury that mirrored the frantic rhythm of Sophie Miller's heart. It was 7:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, the deadest part of the week, and the diner was a small, fluorescent-lit island in a sea of urban darkness. Sophie moved between the few occupied booths with a practiced, weary grace, the smell of stale coffee and hot grease clinging to her uniform. In her apron pocket, folded into a tight, sharp square, was the notice. Final warning notice of eviction. The words were seared into her memory. $357 short on rent. It might as well have been $1 million. Every dollar she made went to two things: the shoebox apartment she shared with her younger sister Lily, and the mountain of medical bills for Lily's cystic fibrosis treatments. There was no buffer, no safety net. There was only the grind. Her manager, a perpetually sour man named Mr. Henderson, watched her from his perch by the cash register, his beady eyes missing nothing. He tracked every refill, every plate, every second she spent talking to a customer. To him, employees were depreciating assets, and Sophie, with her tired eyes and occasional empathy-fueled delays, was depreciating faster than most. Miller Table 4 wants a check. You're not getting paid to daydream. He barked, his voice cutting through the hiss of the grill. Sophie nodded, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. On it, Mr. Henderson. It was as she was delivering the check that the bell above the door chimed a tinny, cheerful sound that was utterly at odds with the man who entered. He was old, probably in his late 80s, and drenched to the bone. His fine wool overcoat, which must have been exorbitantly expensive, when new, was heavy and dark with rainwater. His silver hair was plastered to his scalp, and his face was a roadmap of confusion and fear. He stood just inside the door, dripping onto the worn linoleum, his pale blue eyes darting around the diner, as if he'd materialized there from another time. A couple in a nearby booth snickered. Another customer shook his head in disapproval. Henderson's face tightened into a mask of pure annoyance. "Not on my watch," he muttered, starting to move from behind the counter. "We're not a shelter." But Sophie was already moving. Something in the man's lost expression resonated with a deep protective instinct she couldn't ignore. He looked like her grandfather had in his final years, adrift in the fog of a mind that was slowly betraying him. "So can I help you?" "You should come in out of the cold," she said, her voice soft. The man flinched as if the sound of her voice had startled him. He looked down at his hands, turning them over and over. They were trembling. I'm supposed to meet her," he said, his voice a reedy whisper. "She loves the daisies. I have to find the daisies." Henderson reached them, his presence a wave of cold impatience. "All right, Pops, time to move it along. We're running a business here." No loitering. The old man didn't seem to hear him. His gaze was fixed on something beyond the diner, beyond the rain-slicked street. He fumbled inside his coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he carefully extracted a photograph, its corners soft, and its surface creased with age. He held it out to Sophie with a trembling hand. It was a picture of a beautiful woman with a radiant smile standing in a field of what looked like wildflowers. She was young, vibrant, and full of life. Genevieve, the old man, whispered the name a prayer on his lips. I promised I'd meet her. At our place. Sophie's heart ached. She knew that look. It was the look of someone searching for a memory for a person who was no longer there. She's beautiful, Sophie said gently, taking the photo to look at it more closely. The back was blank, the photo's edges yellowed with time. Henderson's voice was like gravel. Miller, I'm not going to tell you again. Get him out. He's driving away customers. He's just confused, Mr. Henderson. He's soaked. Let me just get him a cup of coffee to warm up, Sophie pleaded, keeping her voice low. Absolutely not. My diner is not a charity ward for every stray that wanders in off the street. Get him out, or you can clock out and not bother coming back tomorrow. The ultimatum hung in the air thick and suffocating. Sophie looked at her boss's implacable face, then at the eviction notice she could feel in her pocket, a sharp reminder of her reality. Her job was her lifeline. Without it, she and Lily were on the street. It was that simple. The logical, sensible part of her brain, the part that had kept her afloat for years, screamed at her to do as he said, to gently but firmly guide the old man back out into the storm and save herself. But then she looked back at the man. He was still staring at the photograph of Genevieve, his thumb stroking her smiling face. A tear traced a path down his wrinkled cheek, mingling with the rainwater. He wasn't a stray. He was a person. A husband who missed his wife. A man who was lost and scared. In that moment, the $357 the apartment, the fear it all faded into the background, replaced by a simple, unshakable conviction. She couldn't do it. She couldn't turn him away. She met Mr. Henderson's glare with a quiet resolve she didn't know she possessed. No, she said, her voice, barely a whisper, but it was as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence of the diner. I'm not sending him back out there. Mr. Henderson's face went from sour to a blotchy, furious red. For a moment, he looked like he might actually explode. The few remaining customers in the diner stared, their conversation ceasing forks, hovering midway to their mouths. What did you just say to me? He hissed, stepping so close Sophie could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I said I'm not sending him out into that storm. Sophie repeated her voice, gaining a sliver of strength. She turned her back on Henderson, a deliberate and final act of insubordination, and gently guided the old man toward an empty booth in the corner, away from the prying eyes and the cold draft of the door. Come on, sir. Let's get you sat down. You're shivering. The man allowed himself to be led, shuffling his wet shoes on the floor. He slid into the worn vinyl seat, his movements slow and uncertain. He placed the precious photograph of Genevieve on the table, centering it meticulously, his only anchor in a confusing world. You're fired, Miller Henderson's shout echoed through the diner. You hear me? Fired. Get your things and get out and take him with you. Sophie flinched, the words landing like physical blows. Fired. The single word represented a catastrophic failure. It meant the eviction was no longer a threat. It was a certainty. It meant facing Lily with the news that their already precarious world was about to crumble. A wave of panic washed over her so intense it made her dizzy. But when she looked at the old man who was now staring at her with wide, trusting eyes, the panic was replaced by a strange, stubborn calm. She had made her choice. Now she had to see it through. Ignoring her boss, she walked behind the counter, her co-worker Ben giving her a look of stunned sympathy. She poured a cup of coffee, her hand steady, despite the tremor she felt inside. She added 3 packets of sugar and a generous pour of cream, just the way her grandfather used to like it. She placed the steaming mug on the table in front of the man. "Here," she said softly. "This will warm you up." He looked at the coffee, then back at her. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps just gratitude, warmed his pale eyes. He wrapped his trembling hands around the mug, soaking in its heat. "Thank you, my dear," he murmured. "You're very kind. Just like her." He nodded toward the photograph. Sophie's heart constricted. She pulled a chair from another table and sat opposite him, leaning in. "My name is Sophie. What's your name, sir?" He blinked slowly. "My name. It's Walter." He said it with a hint of surprise, as if rediscovering a forgotten fact. "It's nice to meet you, Walter. Can you tell me where you live? Maybe I can help you get home." Walter shook his head, a look of distress clouding his features. "Home? No, I can't go home yet. I have to wait. The promise." He tapped a finger on the table. "Every year, on this day, we meet where the water sings." She loved the sound of the water. Henderson had stormed back into the kitchen, the swinging door flapping violently in his wake. Sophie knew her time was limited. She needed information, anything that could help her piece together his story. "The water sings," she prompted gently. "Do you mean a fountain or a river?" "The fountain," he said, his eyes lighting up with a brief spark of clarity. "In the garden, where I first gave her the daisies." She said they were bits of sunshine. His face fell again. "But the garden looks different now. The trees are all wrong, and there are glass mountains everywhere." Glass mountains. Sophie's mind raced. Downtown, the new financial district was all skyscrapers of steel and glass. Was it possible he was talking about a park or a square that had been redeveloped? "Walter, do you have any identification on you? A driver's license? Anything with an address?" He fumbled in his pockets again, a look of rising panic on his face. He pulled out a silk handkerchief, a silver pen, and a small, smooth stone, but no wallet other than the one that held Genevieve's picture. He must have lost it. The kitchen door swung open again. Henderson stood there holding Sophie's worn coat and her small backpack. He threw them onto a nearby empty table. "Out. Now! I've already called security to escort you both off the premises if you're not gone in 2 minutes." The finality of it hit her. This was real. She stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. Ben hurried over from behind the counter, slipping a small grease-stained paper bag into her hand. "It's a couple of muffins," he whispered, avoiding her eyes. "For the road." "I'm sorry, Sophie. It's not your fault, Ben. Thank you." She gave him a weak smile and turned back to Walter. "Come on, Walter," she said, her voice brighter than she felt. "Let's go on an adventure. Let's go find the place where the water sings." She helped him to his feet. He was frail but surprisingly tall, leaning on her slightly as they walked toward the door. As they passed Henderson, she didn't look at him. She couldn't. The shame and fear were too raw. She pushed the door open, and the cold, wet wind hit them like a slap in the face. They stood on the pavement, under the diner's flickering neon sign, the city lights blurring in the relentless downpour. She had no job, $74 in her bank account, an eviction notice in her pocket, and a lost, confused old man by her side who thought skyscrapers were glass mountains. For a terrifying moment, the sheer insanity of her situation threatened to overwhelm her. She had thrown away her only means of survival for a complete stranger. She was just as lost as he was. Then Walter squeezed her arm gently. "Don't you worry, my dear," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "Genevieve is watching over us. She always does. Looking into his earnest, trusting face, Sophie knew she couldn't fall apart. Not yet. She took a deep breath, pulling her thin coat tighter around her. "Okay, Walter," she said, managing a small, determined smile. Which way to the singing water? The city at night was a cacophony of hostile sounds, the hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing subway train that vibrated up through the soles of Sophie's worn-out sneakers. The rain had eased to a persistent, chilling drizzle that seemed to seep into their very bones. Sophie held her small, flimsy umbrella over Walter's head, leaving herself mostly exposed to the elements. "Is any of this familiar?" "Walter?" she asked, her voice strained against the noise of the city. They had been walking for nearly 20 minutes, a slow, shuffling pace dictated by Walter's frailty. He pointed a trembling finger toward a small, manicured park sandwiched between two towering office buildings. "The trees," he murmured, his voice laced with confusion. They were smaller. "And the bench. Our bench was oak." They approached the park. It was a modern, sterile space with concrete planters and angular metal benches. In the center, a minimalist sculpture spouted arcs of water into a shallow basin. The singing water. It had to be. "Is this it, Walter? Is this the place?" He stared at the fountain, his expression a mixture of recognition and deep disappointment. "It's loud. The song is wrong. It used to be a whisper." He looked around his shoulders, slumping. "She won't like it. This isn't our place. Not anymore." The spark of hope in Sophie's chest dimmed. This wasn't a triumphant discovery. It was another dead end that only served to agitate him further. They sat on one of the cold, wet benches. Sophie gave Walter one of the muffins Ben had given her. He ate it slowly, methodically, his gaze distant. Sophie knew she couldn't just wander the streets with him all night. She had to be methodical. She had to think. She pulled out her phone, shielding the screen from the rain. The battery was at 32%. She had to make it count. "Walter." She began again, trying a new tack. "Your coat is very nice. Do you remember where you got it?" He looked down at his sleeve as if seeing it for the first time. A gift. Genevieve. She had impeccable taste. Sophie gently turned over the collar. The label was discreet, but unmistakable, Caraseni. A quick search on her phone told her it was an exclusive bespoke tailor in Milan. The price of a single coat could likely pay her rent for 2 years. This man wasn't just well off, he was wealthy, exceptionally wealthy. That meant he wasn't a nameless, forgotten person. Someone somewhere had to be looking for him. "And your watch, Walter? It's very handsome." He held up his left wrist. The watch was an elegant vintage piece with a worn leather strap. It was simple, but exuded a quiet, timeless quality. Sophie leaned in closer, pretending to admire it. On the back, so small she almost missed, it was a delicate, swirling inscription. She used her phone's flashlight to read the tiny letters. "WB to GB forever. 10-5-158. Her heart leaped. WB Walter B. and GB Genevieve B. This was the first real clue. A concrete piece of information. "Walter B.," she whispered to herself. She opened her browser again, the signal wavering. She typed in, "Missing elderly man, Walter B., city name." The search returned a smattering of unrelated news stories. Nothing. She tried again. "Prominent citizens, Walter B." Too many results. Walter Brennan, the actor. Walter Becker, the musician. She needed to narrow it down. What else did she know? The expensive coat. The glass mountains. He was likely connected to the financial district. She refined her search. Walter B. CEO Finance. City name. The screen refreshed, and one name jumped out from the list of results. Walter Halewell, founder and chairman emeritus of Halewell Enterprises. Sophie's breath hitched. Halewell Enterprises was not just a company, it was an empire. Their logo, a stylized B that looked like a mountain peak, was emblazoned on the very skyscraper they were sitting next to. The Glass Mountain. Her fingers flew across the screen. She tapped on the first news article, a profile from a financial magazine published a few years ago. The picture showed a sharp, commanding man in his late 70s with the same pale blue eyes as the man sitting next to her, but full of fire and intellect. The article described him as a titan of industry, a ruthless but brilliant visionary who had built a global conglomerate from the ground up. It also mentioned his beloved wife, Genevieve, who had passed away a decade prior after a long illness. It spoke of their legendary devotion to one another and their shared love for the city's botanical gardens. It was him. There was no doubt. A wave of relief so profound it made her weak washed over Sophie. He had a name. He had a family. He had a place in the world. But the relief was quickly followed by a cold spike of intimidation. She wasn't just helping a lost old man. She was in the presence of one of the richest, most powerful men in the country. The article also mentioned his only son and current CEO, Lawrence Halewell. A quick search for his name brought up a different kind of profile. Pictures showed a man in his late 40s with his father's sharp features, but a colder, more guarded expression. Articles described him as brutally efficient, a corporate predator, and intensely private. He was known for his aggressive business tactics and his intolerance for incompetence. He did not look like a man who would suffer fools gladly. Sophie swallowed hard. What was she supposed to do, march up to the front door of Halewell Tower with his confused father in tow? They'd probably have her arrested before she even reached the lobby. She found the corporate website for Halewell Enterprises. Under Contact Us, there was a general information number. Her hands were shaking now, not from the cold, but from sheer nerves. Her battery was at 19%. It was now or never. She took a deep breath, pressed the number, and lifted the phone to her ear. "Okay, Walter," she whispered more to herself than to him. "Let's try to get you home." The phone began to ring, each chime echoing the frantic pounding of her own heart. She was about to step into a world she couldn't possibly imagine. "Halewell Enterprises, how may I direct your call?" The voice on the other end of the line was crisp professional and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a gatekeeper. "Hello, my name is Sophie Miller." She began her own voice, sounding thin and unsteady. "I need to speak to someone in security or to Mr. Lawrence Halewell's office. It's an urgent personal matter." There was a slight pause. "Mr. Halewell does not accept unsolicited calls. If this is a business inquiry, you can submit it through the portal on our website." "No, it's not business," Sophie insisted, her frustration rising. "I believe I've found his father, Walter Halewell. He's lost and confused. He's with me right now." The silence on the line stretched for a long, skeptical moment. "Ma'am, we have protocols for this. Mr. Halewell's father is secure at his residence. I'm afraid you must be mistaken." "I'm not mistaken." Sophie's voice rose, attracting the attention of a couple hurrying past the park. "He has a watch with the initials WB to GB. He's talking about his wife, Genevieve. I'm looking at the Halewell Tower right now. He called it a glass mountain." The mention of specific private details seemed to shift the tone on the other end. The professional veneer cracked slightly. "Please hold." Sophie was put on hold, the bland corporate music doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. She looked over at Walter, who had dozed off his head, resting against the cold back of the bench. He looked so vulnerable, so far removed from the titan of industry described in the articles. Her resolve hardened. She didn't care who his son was. This man needed help. After what felt like an eternity, a new voice came on the line. It was male, deep, and laced with authority and impatience. "This is Owen, head of Mr. Halewell's personal security. You claim to be with Mr. Walter Halewell. State your location. Now." There was no preamble, no politeness. It was an order. Sophie gave him the address of the park. "We're on a bench near the fountain. Do not move from that location. A car will be there in 5 minutes. Do not speak to him. Do not ask him for anything. Do not let him wander off. Is that understood?" "Yes." "I understand." The line went dead. The 5 minutes felt like an hour. Sophie's mind raced with possibilities, most of them bad. Would they thank her? Or would they accuse her of something, of trying to extort money, of kidnapping rich people had lawyers and security teams, and a deep-seated suspicion of the world outside their gilded cage? She was a jobless waitress, in a damp coat, a nobody. Exactly 5 minutes later, a sleek black sedan, the kind that absorbs light rather than reflects it, pulled silently to the curb. It was so out of place on the gritty city street that it looked like a spaceship had landed. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits got out. They moved with an efficient, predatory grace. They were not drivers. They were professionals. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar above his eyebrow, approached her. "Miss Miller." His eyes scanned her up and down, then moved to the sleeping form of Walter. A flicker of recognition and concern crossed his face. "Yes," Sophie said, her voice barely a squeak. "I'm going to need you to come with us. Mr. Halewell wants to speak with you." It was not a request. The other man gently roused Walter. "Mr. Halewell, sir. We're here to take you home." Walter woke with a start, looking around in alarm. But when he saw the men, a vague sense of familiarity seemed to calm him. He allowed them to help him to his feet and guide him into the warm, leather-scented interior of the car. Sophie was directed to the front passenger seat. The ride was silent and unnervingly smooth. They didn't go to a police station or a hospital. They drove straight toward the gleaming glass mountain that dominated the skyline. They descended into a private underground garage, bypassing the public entrance entirely. The security was immense. Gates, cameras, guards. It was like entering a fortress. She was led from the garage into a private elevator that shot upwards with breathtaking speed. The security guard Owen, who had spoken to her on the phone, stood beside her, silent and imposing. They didn't speak a word. The doors opened directly into a vast, minimalist penthouse office. The space was an expanse of glass chrome and dark wood. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the sprawling, rain-swept city below. The view was worth more than Sophie would likely earn in 10 lifetimes. Sitting behind a massive obsidian desk was a man who commanded the room just by breathing. Lawrence Halewell rose to his feet as they entered. He was exactly as he appeared in the photos, tall, lean, and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her car. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes, the same piercing blue as his father's, were as cold and sharp as chips of ice. He wasn't looking at Sophie. His gaze was fixed on his father, who was being gently settled into a plush armchair by the other guard. Father Lawrence said, his voice tight with a controlled, furious energy. "Are you all right? Did she hurt you? Did she ask you for money?" Walter just looked around the room, confused by the opulence. "Genevieve?" he asked softly. "Is this her new house?" Lawrence's jaw clenched. He finally turned his glacial gaze on Sophie. He looked at her wet hair, her cheap, damp coat, her worn-out sneakers leaving damp marks on his polished marble floor. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. So he began his voice, low and dangerous. "You're the one who found him. Tell me what you want." Sophie was taken aback. Not, "Thank you for finding my lost father." Not, "I'm so relieved he's safe." But a blunt, cynical accusation. "I don't want anything," she said, her own anger starting to burn away her fear. "I found him wandering in the rain. He was confused and cold. I was trying to help him." "Help him?" Lawrence sneered, taking a step closer. A lawyerly-looking man in a pinstripe suit who had been standing silently in the corner stepped forward and placed a tablet on the desk. "My father, Walter Halewell, has an estimated net worth of $9 billion. People don't just help him, Miss Miller. They see an opportunity. You lost your job tonight, didn't you? At a place called the Morning Glory Diner. Fired for insubordination. It seems you suddenly found yourself in a desperate financial situation just moments before you conveniently stumbled upon a confused billionaire." Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. They had already investigated her. In the span of less than 30 minutes, they had dissected her pathetic, struggling life. "I lost my job because I wouldn't throw your father out into the street like my boss wanted me to," she retorted, her voice shaking with indignation. Lawrence let out a short, humorless laugh. "A convenient story. And I'm sure you have a price for your noble sacrifice. So let's stop wasting time. Name it. 5,010. Will that cover your rent for a few months?" He spoke the numbers as if they were loose change, an insulting pittance. This was a nightmare. She had acted out of kindness, and she was being treated like a criminal, a scheming opportunist. The injustice of it was a physical blow. She lifted her chin, meeting his icy stare with a glare of her own. "Your father was scared," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He was looking for his wife. He was holding her photograph and crying. I didn't see a billionaire. I saw a man who needed help. You can't put a price on that, Mr. Halewell. And you can keep your money. I wouldn't take a dime from you." She turned to leave, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and rage. She had never been so humiliated in her life. "We're not finished here." Lawrence's voice cut through the air, stopping her in her tracks. "For my father's safety and our family's privacy, you'll be signing a non-disclosure agreement before you leave this building." The lawyer slid the tablet across the desk. It was an NDA, pages of dense legal text that would bind her to silence. She was being erased from the story, her act of compassion reduced to a legal transaction to be buried and forgotten. This, she realized, was the lion's den, and she had just discovered how sharp its teeth were. Sophie stared at the tablet on the desk, then back at Lawrence Halewell's cold, impassive face. The room felt like it was closing in the billion-dollar view of the city, just a backdrop for her own personal humiliation. They didn't see a person. They saw a problem to be managed, a loose end to be tied up with a legal document and a dismissive check. "I'm not signing anything," Sophie said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I didn't do anything wrong." The lawyer, a man named Peterson, cleared his throat. "Miss Miller, it's standard procedure. It protects Mr. Halewell's privacy. It's for everyone's benefit." "It benefits him," Sophie shot back, gesturing toward Lawrence. "It ensures that the story of his father wandering the streets, lost and alone for hours, never gets out. It's damage control." Lawrence's eyes narrowed. "My father's well-being is my only concern. His condition makes him vulnerable. Vulnerable to people like you, who might seek to exploit it." "People like me," Sophie's voice cracked with disbelief. "I gave up my job for him, the only thing I have that keeps a roof over my sister's head. What more do you think I could possibly want from you?" Just then, the private elevator chimed softly. The doors slid open, and a woman in her late 50s bustled out. She was dressed in expensive-looking but practical clothing, her hair perfectly coiffed. She projected an air of supreme competence and warm concern. "Oh, Walter, thank goodness," she exclaimed, rushing over to the old man's side. "I was worried sick I just turned my back for a moment to take a call and he was gone." "The garden door. I'm so dreadfully sorry, Lawrence." She fussed over Walter, straightening his collar and patting his hand. "There you are, you little escape artist. You gave us all quite a scare." Lawrence's severe expression softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at the woman. "It's all right, Diane. He's safe now." "This person," he said, with a flick of his eyes toward Sophie, "found him downtown." The woman Diane turned to Sophie, her face a mask of practiced gratitude. "Oh, thank you, my dear. You're a godsend. I'm Diane Wexler Walter's personal caregiver. It's been a challenging few weeks. His episodes of confusion are becoming more frequent." She seemed perfect, kind, professional, caring, but something about her felt off. Her concern seemed a little too polished, her words a little too rehearsed. Sophie couldn't put her finger on it, but a small alarm bell went off in the back of her mind. "I'm just glad he's safe," Sophie said, her tone clipped. Diane gave Walter's shoulder a comforting squeeze. "He keeps looking for his Genevieve. It's his most persistent delusion. He gets fixated on this idea of meeting her in a park that was demolished 30 years ago. I'm sure he filled your head with all sorts of nonsense." She smiled at Sophie, a patronizing, dismissive smile that grated on Sophie's nerves. It was a subtle attempt to invalidate everything Walter had said, to paint Sophie as a naive girl who had been taken in by the ramblings of a senile old man. He was very clear about some things Sophie countered, refusing to be dismissed. He knew her name. He knew where they used to meet. Lawrence stepped forward, his patience clearly evaporated. "Enough. Miss Wexler is the best in her field. My father is in good hands. Peterson offer her the standard settlement for this kind of nuisance incident and get the NDA signed. I want this over with." Peterson the lawyer approached Sophie again, this time holding out a check. Sophie glanced at it. It was for $25,000. An absurd, life-changing amount of money that was being presented to her like an insult. It was hush money. Sophie looked from the check to Lawrence's arrogant face, to Diane Wexler's saccharine smile, and finally to Walter. He had been quiet through the whole exchange, his gaze drifting around the unfamiliar room. But now his eyes were fixed on Diane. The fog of confusion seemed to recede for a moment, replaced by a flicker of something else. Fear, no, it was more like resentment. The new Lady Walter said suddenly, his voice raspy but clear. Everyone in the room froze. He hardly ever spoke in coherent sentences, according to Diane. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed a finger not at Sophie, but directly at his perfectly coiffed caregiver. The new lady he repeated with more force. She took them. From the desk. Lawrence turned to him. "Took what, father?" "What did she take?" Walter's brow furrowed in concentration, struggling to retrieve the words from the fog. The boxes he finally managed. "My letters. Genevieve's letters. She put them in a bag. Said they were clutter." A heavy, profound silence fell over the office. The accusation coming from the depths of Walter's confused mind was more shocking than any rational argument. Genevieve's letters were legendary within the family. He had read and reread them for a decade, his last tangible connection to the love of his life. The idea that anyone would call them clutter was unthinkable. Diane Wexler's warm smile faltered. A flash of pure panic crossed her eyes before she quickly composed herself. "Oh, Walter, you're confused, dear," she said with a light, nervous laugh. We were just tidying up your study. We packed them away safely for you. You remember." But Walter shook his head, a stubborn, childlike gesture. "No. You said, 'Time to let go.' You took my letters." He looked at his son, his blue eyes pleading, and for the first time that night, completely lucid. "She took my Genevieve." Lawrence stared at Diane. His face, already a mask of cold control, became something harder, something dangerous. The suspicion he had so readily thrown at Sophie the jobless waitress now slowly, chillingly began to shift its focus toward the perfectly credentialed, highly paid caregiver he had entrusted with his father's life. The entire dynamic of the room had fractured. The check, the NDA, Sophie's perceived guilt, it all evaporated in the wake of Walter's simple, devastating words. Sophie realized she was no longer the accused. She was a witness, and the real drama in the lion's den was only just beginning. Lawrence Halewell did not become the head of a multi-billion-dollar empire by being unobservant. He was a man who processed information with terrifying speed, who saw patterns where others saw chaos. His father's accusation, raw and unprompted, was a piece of data that didn't fit the established narrative. It was an anomaly, and Lawrence loathed anomalies. He didn't yell or make a scene. His reaction was far more chilling. He simply looked at Diane Wexler, and for the first time she seemed to shrink under his gaze. Owen Lawrence said, his voice dangerously calm, "Please escort my father to his private suite here in the tower. Stay with him." To the other guard he said, "See that Miss Wexler is comfortable in the conference room. She is not to make any calls or leave. It was all done with quiet, lethal efficiency." Diane started to protest, her professional composure crumbling into frantic denial. "Lawrence, this is ridiculous. He's having an episode you can't seriously be listening to. The conference room. Diane." Now. His tone left no room for argument. She was led away, her face pale with shock and fear. Now the vast office contained only Lawrence, his lawyer, Peterson, and Sophie. The power dynamic had shifted so violently it was almost palpable. Lawrence was no longer looking at her as a nuisance, but as a potential source of information. He turned to her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something other than arrogance in his eyes. It might have been uncertainty. "Tell me everything that happened tonight," he said. From the moment he walked into that diner, every word he said, omit nothing. Sophie, still reeling, recounted the entire story. She told him about Walter's search for the singing water, his obsession with the daisies, his talk of a promise to Genevieve. She described his moments of clarity and his deep wells of confusion. As she spoke, she realized how intimately she had come to know the workings of Walter's mind in just a few short hours. When she finished, Lawrence was silent for a long time, staring out at the city lights. Peterson, the lawyer, was making quiet notes. The letters, Lawrence finally said half to himself. They were everything to him. He wouldn't let anyone touch them. He turned back to Sophie. "Why did you believe him in the diner? Why risk your job for him?" The question was genuine, stripped of its earlier cynicism. Sophie had to think for a moment. "Because he wasn't looking for money or a place to stay," she said. "He was looking for his wife. The way he held her picture, it was real. You can't fake a love like that." Her answer seemed to strike a chord with him. He nodded slowly. "Owen," he said into his desk intercom, "I want all security footage from the estate for the past 2 weeks pulled. I want a full background check on Diane Wexler, not the one her agency provided. I want our people to do it. Dig deep. Financials, past employers, everything." For the next hour, Sophie sat in the opulent office, a forgotten ghost in a high-stakes corporate drama. Lawrence worked with ruthless precision, making calls, dispatching orders. Information began to trickle back in. The background check on Diane Wexler revealed a sanitized employment history. Too perfect. A deeper dive conducted by Lawrence's formidable security team began to uncover a disturbing pattern. 2 of her previous clients, both wealthy and suffering from cognitive decline, had inexplicably amended their wills to include her for significant sums shortly before their deaths. Both cases had been discreetly settled out of court by the grieving families to avoid a scandal. Then came the security footage. Lawrence had it displayed on a massive screen that emerged from the wall. They watched hours of footage sped up. They saw Diane always smiling, always attentive when other staff were around. But in moments when she thought she was alone with Walter, her demeanor changed. She was impatient, dismissive. They saw her confiscating his phone, limiting his calls. And then they found it. Footage from 3 days ago from a camera in the hallway outside Walter's study. It showed Diane carrying 2 elegant leather-bound archival boxes, the kind used for storing old documents out of the room. She placed them in the trunk of her personal car, the same boxes that had held Genevieve's letters for over a decade. Lawrence stared at the screen, his face like stone. The betrayal was absolute. He had been so focused on external threats, on opportunists like the one he'd presumed Sophie to be, that he had failed to see the viper he had personally invited into his father's home. He finally turned off the screen and looked at Sophie, his expression unreadable. "It seems," he said, his voice heavy with a self-directed anger, "that I owe you an apology, Miss Miller." The words hung in the air, a shocking admission from a man who likely never admitted fault. "I was wrong," he continued. "I misjudged you completely. What you did for my father, it was an act of profound decency in a world where that is a rare commodity. A decency, it seems, that I have forgotten how to recognize." Sophie just nodded, unsure of what to say. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound weariness that made him look suddenly human. "My father trusts you. In a few hours you built a rapport with him that I haven't had in years. He's scared and he's confused, and now he's been betrayed by someone he was supposed to trust." He paused, then looked at her directly, his gaze intense. "I need to ask you for one more thing. I know I have no right, but I'm asking anyway. Would you be willing to come to the estate tomorrow to speak with him? I think seeing a friendly, trusted face might help him understand what's happening. It might help us understand the extent of Diane's manipulation." Sophie looked at this powerful, broken man, and she thought of Walter sitting alone in a suite upstairs, his world turned upside down. She thought of her own empty apartment, the eviction notice, the job she no longer had. Her life was in shambles. But she couldn't say no. "Yes," she said, quietly. "I'll help." The next morning, the same black sedan that had brought her to the tower in fear now drove her away from the city toward the Halewell estate. If the penthouse had been a symbol of modern power, the estate was a monument to old money. A long, winding driveway, cut through acres of perfectly manicured grounds, leading to a sprawling stone mansion that looked more like a European castle than a private home. Lawrence met her at the door. He was dressed not in a suit, but in casual trousers and a sweater. The change was disarming. He looked less like a CEO and more like a son worried about his father. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice subdued. "He's in the solarium. It's his favorite room." The solarium was a beautiful glass-walled room, filled with plants and flowers looking out over a vast, rain-washed garden. Walter was sitting in a comfortable chair, a blanket over his lap, staring out the window. He looked small and lost in the grandeur of his surroundings. When he saw Sophie, his face lit up with genuine warmth and recognition. "My dear," he said, his voice stronger than the night before. "You came back. Did you find the daisies?" Sophie smiled and pulled up a chair beside him. "Not yet, Walter. But we will. How are you feeling today?" Lawrence stood back, watching them, content to be invisible. Sophie spent the next hour just talking to Walter. She didn't press him for information. She asked him about Genevieve, about the photograph, about the gardens. With her gentle prompting in the safety of his familiar environment, his mind seemed to clear. He spoke in longer, more coherent sentences. He told her stories about his wife, about their life together, about the letters they wrote to each other when he traveled for business. Slowly, carefully, she brought the conversation around to Diane. "Walter, the lady who was helping you, Diane. Mr. Halewell is worried about her. He thinks she might have taken things that weren't hers." Walter's pleasant expression clouded over. "The new lady," he said, his old resentment returning. She smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. She said Genevieve was a ghost. That I should forget. He looked at Sophie, his own eyes pleading. "You don't forget love, do you know?" "Walter," Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. "You never do." His simple testimony combined with the evidence from the previous night was all Lawrence needed. While Sophie was talking with Walter, legal and security teams were already in motion. Diane Wexler's employment was terminated. A civil suit was filed to recover any and all assets she had manipulated, and a criminal complaint was lodged with the district attorney's office for fraud and elder abuse. The letters which were found in her apartment were recovered. Lawrence Halewell was not a man who did things by halves. Later that afternoon, Lawrence found Sophie walking in the garden. The drizzle had finally stopped, and a weak sun was breaking through the clouds. "He's calmer now than he's been in months," Lawrence said, coming to stand beside her. "You have a gift, you know. A way of connecting with him." "I just listened," Sophie replied simply. "Most people don't bother," he said. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at his vast, empty garden. "What you said last night about not taking a dime from me. I understand why you said it. I was arrogant and insulting, and I am truly sorry for that. But your circumstances have changed because of my family. You lost your job protecting my father. I cannot in good conscience allow that to stand." Sophie braced herself for another offer of money, but what he said next surprised her. "My father and mother started a charitable foundation years ago. The Halewell Foundation. One of its primary initiatives is elder care funding programs for Alzheimer's research, supporting high-quality nursing facilities, and running outreach for seniors who are isolated. It's been neglected lately. Run by a board of directors who are more interested in tax benefits than in people." He turned to face her fully. "I want to offer you a job, Miss Miller. Not as a handout, but because I believe you are uniquely qualified for it. I want you to be a community liaison officer for the foundation. Your job would be to visit the facilities we fund, to speak with the residents, to listen to them just as you listened to my father. To be our eyes and ears, to ensure the people we are supposed to be helping are treated with dignity and compassion. To ensure that what happened with Diane Wexler never happens to anyone under our watch." He named a salary that made Sophie's head spin. It was more than she had ever dreamed of making. It wasn't just a job, it was a career, a meaningful one. And he added before she could even respond, the foundation also provides comprehensive healthcare benefits. For you and for your dependents. I took the liberty of looking into your sister's condition. Our plan provides access to the best specialists and treatments in the country, all of it covered. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. She thought of Lily, of the constant worry, the endless bills. This wasn't just a lifeline. It was a whole new life. It was a future. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say yes. Lawrence said, a faint, unaccustomed smile touching his lips. My father is already asking when you'll be visiting again. He said you promised to help him find some daisies. Sophie looked past him to the solarium window, where she could see Walter watching them, a small smile on his face. She had walked into a diner 24 hours ago, with nothing but debt and fear. She had made a simple choice, an act of kindness, with no thought of reward. And now everything had changed. It wasn't a reward for finding a billionaire's father. It was a reward for seeing a human being. Yes, Sophie said, a real radiant smile breaking through her tears. Yes, I'd love to. The sun was shining now, and somewhere in the vast gardens of the Halewell estate, Sophie had a feeling there was a perfect spot to plant some daisies. In the end, this wasn't a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It was a story about the extraordinary power of a simple human choice. Sophie Miller didn't know who Walter Halewell was when she sacrificed her job for him. She only knew that he was a person in need of kindness. Her compassion became a key that unlocked a family's secret, exposed a cruel deception, and reminded a powerful man of the values his empire was supposed to be built on. It's a powerful reminder that our true worth is not measured by our bank account or our job title, but by the integrity we show when faced with a choice between what is easy and what is right. Sophie's life was changed not by luck but by character. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the goodness that still exists in the world, please take a moment to hit the like button. Share this video with someone who might need a story of hope and integrity today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will restore your faith in humanity. What's the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story.